Okay, so for today's lesson, right, it's more on introductory. Okay, so first of all, previously you learned about micro. Now we are moving on to macro. So we talk about macroeconomics, right? The first concept that you are going to learn about is actually economic growth. Okay, so when we talk about economic growth, right, we are saying that there's an increase in the total outputs of the economy. So what do we mean by increase in total outputs? How do we measure the increase of total outputs? We look into the metrics called GDP, okay, gross domestic product. So therefore, the first concept that you need to know is the definition of GDP itself. As you can see on my first line over here, it refers to the market value of all final goods and services produced in a country in a given time period. That's how we measure the country's output of a country and also the standard of living of the country itself. So therefore, you can see I highlighted 4 words over here. That's the keyword for you to define the GDP itself. Okay, now remember, we are looking into the market value itself. Market value means later on, I will use the price of the product times the quantity of the output that is being sold. So therefore, we call it as market value. We will learn about the GDP today as an introduction. And then in next week lesson, we'll look into GDP in a bit more details with the reference to the formula. Okay, and these are what you will be examining in your midterms. Okay, midterms. All right. So first of all, the first question. Okay, for today's one, we straight use the question and then as part of our recap as well. The first question over here, you can see that they ask you to differentiate between real GDP and nominal GDP. So let's have a look into nominal GDP here first. Nominal GDP means that I look into the total value. So total value, let me highlight it. Total value of all goods and services produced at the current market prices over a period of time. And in nominal GDP itself, right, I do not exclude the inflation factor. So that means what? That means when I look into nominal GDP, I straight away use the current price of the product times the quantity of output that's being sold or being produced. So you see, you take the current price as part of this calculation. So nominal GDP is not really accurate. Why? Because when you take the current prices, right, you know, the current prices can be very high due to inflation. So therefore, it does not give me a good picture. Because today, right, okay, when nominal GDP is high, let's say when my nominal GDP is high, right? When we say higher GDP, we want to have more outputs. But today, when I say higher nominal GDP, right, it can be because of higher current prices. That is not what we want. That is not what we want. We want higher GDP is being caused by an increase in the quantity itself. But if you look into nominal GDP, it does not give me the picture. Because nominal GDP is high, that could also mean that my current prices is high. That push up the nominal GDP. That's not so accurate already, because every year we will have inflation. So inflation will definitely push up the prices of all the goods and services. Okay, so therefore, we need to use another one, which is real GDP. Real GDP is a more accurate measure of all the goods and services produced at the constant prices. Okay, produced at the constant prices. So what do you mean by constant prices? That means we take the prices from a base year. What do you mean by base year? Base year is a year without inflation and deflation. Okay, so you see here, constant price means that we take the prices, in base year. So what is base year? A year with neither inflation nor deflation. Okay, so that means that this is the most accurate prices that we can take, because in that year, like for example 2010, when there's no very high inflation or deflation, so we take the prices and times the quantity that we produce. So therefore, we take the price at the base year, okay, times the quantity. So it can give me a better picture because this price is being constant. We call it as constant price. Okay. So therefore today, if I see that there is an increase in real GDP, and I can straightaway draw a conclusion by saying that the rise in the real GDP is due to a higher quantity over here. It will not caused by the prices because the prices is fixed. I take the constant prices. I take the prices in the base year. So my prices is fixed already. So it calls as a constant prices. So this metric is good. You know why? Because I know that there is inflation. So I remove the inflation factor. Okay, so I adjust it for inflation. So real GDP, I can say that that is the metric that has been adjusted for inflation itself. So therefore, when I look into real GDP, I know that, okay, when real GDP is higher, that means there is an increase in the output itself, not caused by inflation. I have adjusted the figures. Okay, so therefore, you can see some keywords over here. When you were to define real GDP, we are referring to the value of goods and services at constant prices, adjusted for inflation. Okay, adjusted for inflation. So you can write this as adjusted for inflation. Adjusted for inflation. Okay, so these are the two terms that you first came across. Now, moving on to the next one is to differentiate between actual GDP and potential GDP. Now, the red color words are the answers provided by your lecturer. I provided some additional notes over here in blue color. The blue color one is an easier words for you to define when it comes to exam. So you can just refer to the blue color one. That will be easier for you to study. Okay, now what is actual GDP? Actual GDP is basically like the current level of the GDP that's being produced by the economy. All right, so therefore you can see the blue color words over here, I define as the level of output, okay, the current level of output which the economy experience over a given time. That means during that state, okay, how much of the GDP is being produced, the current state. Okay, so the current level of the outputs in the economy. Okay, so therefore, this is why when you look into the red color words over here, you can see that it demonstrates the existing state. Existing state means the current state, the current situation of the business of the economy. What is the current GDP of the economy? That's what we call as actual GDP. Okay. Now, moving on, when you look into potential GDP, okay, when you look into potential means what? That means I look into your capacity. Okay, so when I say potential GDP, I'm looking into like the capability of the economy, how much they can produce. Okay, we're talking about the capability of the economy itself. So therefore, I define as the level of output which the economy is capable of. That means it indicates the country's productive capacity. Okay, so that's what we call as potential GDP over here. So actual GDP is what you actually producing at. Potential GDP is your total productive capacity. Okay, you may be over your potential or below your potential. Okay, so therefore potential GDP here we looks into the capacity or the capability of the economy itself. Okay. Now, if I modify a bit the words, if I change, differentiate between actual growth and potential growth, what it means. So if I say actual growth means that the percentage change in the actual output, still the same thing. As long as I use the word actual GDP, that means I'm referring to the current level of outputs. So if I say growth, actual growth means what? That means the percentage increase in the current level of outputs. So same thing, if I say potential growth, that means I'm looking into the percentage increase in the country's capacity. I'm looking into the capacity itself. So you just need to differentiate between two words, actual and potential. So later on, we are going to come across some simple calculation questions. These are the calculation questions that you will be examining in your midterms. Okay, so therefore you may want to pay some attention to those calculations later on. Not difficult, it's very direct. Okay, now let's have a look into this calculation question. Assume individuals exclusively purchase 3 distinct items. The provided table illustrates the prices and quantities of each item bought in the years 2020 and 2021. Okay, now what happened is you can see that you are actually being provided with 3 items. I put it in colors, easier for you to see, but when you look into your study guide, I think it is a bit messy, so never mind. I put it in colors like this already, easier to see. You can see that there are 3 items here. Okay, the first item here is noodles. Okay, the green color one that I put in green color is noodles, one item, right? The second item is fish. Okay, and the third item is chicken. So we have 3 items over here. And what information that I have provided to you? You have price and you have quantity. Okay, so surely later on they are going to ask you to calculate things like GDP. So therefore, this is a simple calculations of GDP later on. Okay, price, quantity, and price, also quantity. Okay, so you have 2 years over here, 2020 and 2021. You can see the prices and the quantity itself. Okay, later on we are going to do some calculations in a while, but at least with the colors, you can see that I have 3 items that I look into. Okay, assuming that the economy is producing these 3 items over here, and you are being given the prices and quantity. So now let's have a look into the questions. Calculate the nominal GDP in each of the 2 years. Now, remember, what is nominal GDP again? We say nominal GDP, we look into the value of goods and services as measured by the current prices, right? So therefore, the formula for nominal GDP is, I just use the current prices times the quantity that's being produced. Remember, nominal GDPs, I look into the current prices. Okay, so that means what? Easy lo, just times together only. Like in 2020, right? Okay, for the noodles, you use 7 times 400. Okay, and then also plus another item here, make sure you put in the bracket. Okay, $8 times 225 units of fish, plus another bracket, $10 times 175 the units of chicken. So you can see I put it over here. In 2020, what you need to do is you just, this is the value of the noodles plus value of the fish and also value of the chicken. Okay, and then you add it up, you get the answers. That is the nominal GDP in 2020. You do the same as well in 2021. Okay, you calculate the value of noodles plus the value of fish plus the value of chicken. And at the end, you get the nominal GDP of that country. As simple as that. That's how you calculate your nominal GDP itself. Okay, so you just take the current prices times the quantity of outputs that the country is producing. Get the answers. Okay, now moving on to the next question. Calculate real GDP in each of the 2 years using 2020 as the base year. All right, now a few key information over here. We say that 2020 is the base year here. Okay, so we say 2020 is a base year. So what is base year? A year with neither inflation nor deflation. So we say 2020 is the base year. Now, why we need this information is because we were to calculate real GDP. How to calculate real GDP? Real GDP means we look into the constant prices, the prices in base year. So we take the constant prices, okay, That means the prices in the base year times quantity. Okay, so that means what? That means I take 2020 as the base year. So to calculate, let's say in 2020, right? Okay, so for 2020 will be the same. Because why? Because it is a base year. So it's the same thing. Value of the noodles, value of the fish, and also value of the chicken. So all these will be the same as what you have calculated just now, which is 6,350. It's the same because this is the base year. Okay, so we use back the same information, so therefore we get the same answers. But what is different is in 2021, because now we are not going to use the current prices anymore, but we use the base year. So that means in the 2021, okay, to calculate the value of noodles, I need to use this original price in the base year times this quantity to get the value of noodles. I need to use this price of fish times the current quantity of fish to get the value of fish. I need to get the constant price of the chicken in 2020 times the quantity of chicken to get the value of chicken. So therefore, you can see that my calculations over here is this one. I use $7 times 550 units to get the value of noodles, to get the value of fish, and to get the value of chicken. So at the end of the day, I get 8,600. Now, do you realize one thing here is that when you convert your nominal GDP here, just now you calculate your nominal GDP is 9450 in 2021, right? But when I convert it into real GDP, you can see that the figures are slightly less, right? Why? Because we adjust it for inflation. Right? So you can see the value is lower because we adjust it for inflation. Just now when we were calculating the when we were calculating the nominal GDP, right? We use current prices. The current prices will be high, so therefore you see you get a quite high values. But we cannot say that this high value is really caused by the quantity. We cannot say that because the current prices is going up as well. So therefore we need to convert nominal GDP into real GDP here. By how? By using constant prices. I use the constant prices over here, but I calculate at the end, I get these figures. If I compare 2020 to 2021, all right, it's still good. You see, I have an increase in the real GDP, right? And I can say today the increase of real GDP is caused by the quantity itself. Why? Because the price is fixed. So today, the increment from 2020 to 2021 over here, that is an increment in the GDP. Okay, I can say that. Okay, but anyway, when I do comparison between nominal GDP and real GDP of 2021, we can see that after I adjust for inflation, the value is slightly lower. Okay, so just want to show you that there is this inflation playing a role. Okay, what is inflation? You haven't learned about what is inflation yet. Okay, so therefore, quick notes over here. When I say inflation means, let me erase all the annotations. So inflation means the general increase in the price level of goods and services in an economy over a period of time. Okay, so the general increase or general rise in the price level of goods and services in an economy over a period of time. Okay, we have two ways for us to measure inflation. Okay, ways of measuring inflation. We can use CPI. Okay, we can use CPI. CPI means Consumer Price Index. Where's CPI? That means I look into the average changes in the price level of a basket of goods and services. Okay, or I can use GDP deflated index later on. deflator. Okay, so we have two ways for us to measure inflation. One is CPI and one is GDP deflator. For today's lesson, this is our focus, GDP deflator. So slight difference over here. When you look into CPI, okay, when you look into consumer price index, we look into, let me do some annotation here. When you look into CPI, we look into the average changes in the price level of a basket of goods and services. That means I do not look into all the goods and services produced, but only look into a basket of goods and services that is being consumed by the people in the country. So that means for CPI, when I were to calculate these metrics, I go and observe the changes in the price level of a basket of goods and services. That means I look into what is being consumed in our daily life. Transportation, necessities, clothing, fashion, technologies, and all this. A basket of goods and services. If I look into GDP deflator, slightly the same, but we do not look into a basket of goods and services, but we look into all, okay, average changes in the price level of all goods and services produced in the economy. So can you see the difference here? One is I look into a basket of goods and services, and the one is I look into all goods and services. So we are going to focus on GDP deflator for today. All right, now let's have a look into that next question. Calculate the GDP deflator for each of the 2 years. GDP deflator is like index. Okay, it's an index. So if I say index means what? Index means the base is 100. Okay, when I say index, if index is 100, means this is a base year. What is base year again? Base year is a year with neither inflation nor deflation. Okay, now if today later on, when I calculate this GDP deflator index, I get higher 100. Let's say I got my index, which is 110. So it's higher than 100. So if it's higher than 100, that means what? That means that there is inflation. Okay? If today my index is lower than 100, let's say 90, that means that there will probably be deflation. That means the opposite of inflation. That means the price level is going down instead. So remember, when you look into index, 100 itself is the base. Okay, so therefore the question here is asking us, calculate the GDP deflator index for the 2 years. So how do we calculate this GDP deflator index? We use this formula. Okay, I provide you this formula. You will use it in your midterm as well. You use the current expenditure, that means your current GDP, divided by the real GDP. The expenditure here you change to GDP lah. Okay, so current GDP, okay, divided by the real GDP times 100. Okay, so I also put it over here. This is easier to understand. Okay. Same thing, huh? All right, now let's look into 2020 first. Now, 2020, I already say it's a base year. That means neither inflation nor deflation. Do I still need to do any calculation? No need. Okay, straight away it becomes 100. Why? Because that's a base year. I already say base year is a year with no inflation and deflation. So it's 100. Okay, because we already say 2020 as the base year in the question. Now, we have to do the 2021. Okay, so how do we do that? Very simple. Current GDP of 2021 is how much? 9450. As you can see, this pink color one. Okay, real GDP is how much? 8006. So I use, very simple, I just use 9450 as the current GDP divided by the real GDP times 100, I get this answer. Do you realize one thing over here is above 100? So that is probably an inflation over here already. But the question is, how much is the percentage of inflation? That's what we are going to calculate later on in the next question. Can follow so far? So that means I'm just using this index itself to calculate the index first. So in 2020, the index is 100. In 2021, the index is 109.9. And you can see it's above 100. That means there is an inflation. But how much is the percentage of inflation? That we are going to look into it in the next question. Okay, so now let's have a look into the next question. Calculate inflation for 2021. So we know there's inflation already, but by how much? Again, we use this formula. I have provided you over here. Okay, so therefore, you can see that we use the current year's price index minus the last year index divided by the last year index times 100. Or you can understand by this one, my year 2 index minus year 1 index divided by year 1 times 100. Okay, that means what? That means just now I got 109.9, right? So very simple. 109.9. Okay, there's a new index minus the old index is 100. Okay, because 2020 is 100, right? Okay, divided by 100. Okay, so you divide this one. Okay, then after that, you times 100. Okay, at the end, this one is very easy. You know that 9.9%. So that means there is an inflation of how much? 9.9%. Okay, midterm questions are like this. You will have nominal GDP calculations, real GDP calculations, GDP deflated index, and you need to know how to calculate the inflation rate itself. Okay. So that's the simple calculations that you will come across for today's class actually. Okay, let's continue. Okay, next question. Some theories question over here. State whether true or false and explain why. Question A, the business cycle is purely deterministic process. What does it mean by deterministic? That means you can predict, you can determine it. Okay, business cycle referring to the up and down of the economy. The ups and down as measured by the rise and the fall of the real GDP in the economy itself. So it's not something that is determined. I cannot say that, it will definitely forever be increasing. I cannot say that. It's up and down, go through the peak and go through the truth and go through the booming and also the recession. So meaning that economic expansion and contractions occur in a predictable and regular manner. Is it true? Of course, it's not true. It's not deterministic. You cannot predict. You cannot determine. Okay, it's definitely will be up and down. Right. So therefore, the business cycle is not purely deterministic. Okay. While it follows a general pattern of expansion and contraction, but the thing is the timing, the duration, the severity of these phases are uncertain. Why? Due to a multitude of factors such as policy interventions, external shocks, technological advancements, and global economic conditions. That means although you know that in the economy, there will definitely be up and down, but in every times the ups and down, the timing, the impacts, all these are uncertain. You do not know how long it lasts. Okay, so therefore it's not deterministic. The shape of business cycle will be something like this. As I put it in your notes over here, you can see ups and downs, up and down, but you do not know how long it lasts and the impacts. Okay, next question. Inflation tend to rise during the contraction phase. So they are saying that during contraction phase, there's inflation. Okay, due to increased demand for goods and services relative to the supply. This is wrong. Okay. Now you first of all, inflation happens when the economy is booming. Okay. Although you haven't learned about what is inflation yet, general idea is inflation means people spend like crazy. Think about this first. You haven't learned about inflation, you will learn it later on. For now, remember as the reason why inflation happens is because people spend like crazy, causing the shortage of goods and services that causes the price level of goods and services to go up. Okay, so it will not happen in contraction phase. Contraction means like recession. Okay, the bottom of the economy cannot be. Inflation happens when the country is booming, doing too well. People are too rich. People spend money like crazy. Therefore, result in the shortage of goods and services. Okay, so therefore, this statement is wrong. Okay, inflation typically tends to rise during the expansion phase of the business cycle, not the contraction, because during expansion, people will spend, increase total demand for all the goods and services, which can lead to upward pressure on prices because of the shortages. Remember, that's what you learn in micro. Shortages will always push up the prices. All right. So therefore, that result in inflation. Now, few terms I want you to remember. When you look into macro, right? We use the word total demand and total supply. So remember, you see last time when you were learning in micro, okay, you always use demand and supply of goods and services, right? Because we only look into the demand of that item or the supply of that item, one item, right? But when I look into macroeconomics, I look into everything as aggregate. I will start to use aggregate demand. What do you mean by aggregate demand? You haven't learned it yet, but now you just remember aggregate demand means total demand. Why must I use the word total here? Because I'm not referring to one item, I'm referring to all the goods and services in the economy. Okay, same thing. When I look into the supply, I do not just say supply, I say aggregate supply. That means my AS. Or for now, you just remember as total supply. Remember, I'm not referring to the supply of one item, but I'm referring to the supply of all the goods and services. So this is why from now on, you can see when you were to explain the demand and supply, now you will use the word total demand and total supply. Okay. Now, I want you to have a look into business cycle now. So the additional notes that I have provided, some terms that you must know when you were to explain it in your exams or in your assignments. Okay. So first of all, you can see that I have provided you a business cycle. Okay, first of all, you can see that on my y-axis is the real GDP. Okay, I put it over here. Okay, so you can remember that this is all about your GDP on your y-axis. On the x-axis is about the time. And across the year, time means what? Years. That means I'm referring to years. All this while, it goes through the ups and downs, up and down, right? So you can see that at first it goes down over here, and then it expands, okay? So you can see that when my GDP is rising here, okay, GDP is rising here, there's an expansion. Once it reached the peak, okay, we call it as a peak here, and then it goes down, okay, that's what we call as recession, and then comes to the bottom, okay, of the economy, and then after that, it expand again, and then reach the top, and then going down. So you can see there's an expansion and contraction over here. Ups and down across the years, right? So you can see that over the years, from the origin to here, over the years, okay, the GDP is up and down, okay? My real GDP is up and down. But overall, you can see there's an increasing trend, right? Overall, you can see is upward, right? That's the overall trend, okay? Overall trend is upwards, okay? So therefore, from here, you can see different stages over here, different phases of business cycle. Okay, now a few terms I want you to remember. Okay, so now, let's say we look into, so I want you to remember this curve here that you see, okay, this curve that you see here, I name it as real GDP, okay, my actual GDP, okay, I can call it as my actual GDP. Okay, the curve, the curve that goes up and down, I call it as actual GDP. The straight line over here, the trend line that I say overall is increasing, right? That is what we call as the potential GDP. That means my capacity. Overall, the capacity of the economy is increasing, right? Okay, now I want you to see the gaps here. Okay. So I put orange color. Now, let's say in this one, okay, you can see this one peak here. This peak here, okay, is the curve, right? The actual GDP that I'm referring to. And this is my potential GDP, right? So do you see a gap over here? I'm producing way beyond my capacity. Do you realize that? Because what I'm actually producing is up to here, but the economic capacity is only here. So do you see a gap? We call it as inflationary gap. Okay, so one term over here, when my actual GDP or actual output is larger than potential output, I say that as inflationary gap. That means we call it as positive output gap. You are producing way beyond your capacity. Okay, so therefore, what happened to the prices? The prices will go up or down. You are producing beyond already. That means people spend like crazy, things are not enough, shortage of goods and services. So that means price will go up. Yep, correct. Okay, so the economy is operating above the normal capacity utilization. So the good thing here is everyone will have a job. Okay, everyone have a job, low unemployment. Okay, but there will be high inflation. Things will be very expensive because of the shortage of goods and services. Insufficient capacity. You are producing beyond your capacity already. Okay. Vice versa, if I look into this one, the bottom here, truth. Okay. So when you look into here, you see, you produce at here, but your capacity is here. Your potential GDP is here. Okay. So that means there is a gap here as well. You are producing below your capacity. So here we call as deflationary gap. Or you can call it as recessionary gap. That means a negative gap. That means the actual output is way lower than potential outputs. That means you are producing below the capacity of the economy. That means at this situation, maybe people don't want to spend. People are very pessimistic. You as a businessman, you don't want to produce a lot. You're scared that you cannot sell it out. Okay, so therefore the bad thing here is unemployment will be very high. People could be jobless because the business does not even need them to produce the goods and services. But the prices will be low because people don't even want to buy, right? So the prices could be low, low inflation, because there could be too much of surplus of goods and services or too much of spare capacity. You can still choose to produce more because you are producing below the capacity anyway. So therefore, this slide over here, I just want to show you two terms. One is inflationary gap, and the other one is deflationary or recessionary gap. So therefore, when you do your assignments, when you were to analyze your diagrams, at the end, you must specify whether it is having inflationary gap or recessionary gap. Okay, so inflationary gap means the actual GDP is producing beyond, okay, the potential GDP itself. So you determine this by looking into the graph. This is for your diagram analysis. I'm saying your diagram analysis. In your assignment, there's one part called diagram analysis. So when you were to analyze your diagram, you must use all these specific economics terms. So therefore, when you observe that, okay, from your diagram, you have that actual GDP higher than potential GDP, then you must specify the word inflationary gap. And you can talk about its impacts. Impacts as in, like for example, low unemployment, high inflation because of insufficient goods and services. Or this one. Okay, so these are the terms that you will definitely use it when it comes to assignments. Next question, I will need to draw some annotation. So I use iPad. And also one more thing. You all know when is your midterm already, right? Midterm is on 4th of June, right? I think it's 4th of June, Tuesday evening. So later on, you need to let me know in case on that day, you are not able to make it for midterms. You will need to let me know later on by this week. So that means you will have another session to do the midterm if you can't make it on 4th of June with valid reasons. I think your lecturer posted the announcement on Times, right? You check and see. I think she uploaded a link as well for you to write your name if you cannot make it. So I think it's 4th of June. Let me see. Yeah, you check and see 4th of June, right? 6 p.m. Why they love to make it in the evening one? Yeah, 4th of June. So, hey, take note of this. If later you cannot make it, you let me know. Okay, shall we continue a bit more? Then once we are done, then okay, so a few things. Okay, so first of all, let's look into we talk about economic growth, right? And we say that how can we achieve economic growth? So let's look into what are the ways to achieve long-term economic growth. Okay, some extra notes here to show you some graph. Okay, so this is like additional notes. Okay, so we have two main ways for us to achieve long-term economic growth. Okay, one is increase in the factor quantity. Okay, one is increase the factor quantity. So what do you mean by factor? Factor means my resources. Okay, factor means by resources. Okay, so factor means resources. Like for example, when you have more labor. Okay, so example, when you have more labor, more workers, so you are able to produce more. Remember when I say economic growth, that means what? That means I want to have more real GDP of the economy. That means more total output in the economy. Okay, so therefore, one way for us to be able to achieve this long-term economic growth is through having more quantity of resources, like having more workers. Having more workers will allow you to produce more goods and services. Okay, that's one way. So I can show this in the graph. Okay, we can show it in a graph called production function. Okay, we can look into production function. So what is production function? Production function is a graph that looks into two relationships, which is the real GDP on my y-axis and the quantity of resources. Now let's say here we look into labor. Okay, so it will be like this. Okay, this is my production function. So do you realize one thing over here? Let's say initially I'm at this point A. Okay, let's say at first the economy is having this amount of labor and at this amount of real GDP. Okay, so at first I put it in yellow color here, point A. Okay, you are having this amount of the labor, okay, and this amount of real GDP. I put it as Y. Okay. Now, what happens is when you have more labor, so therefore now it moves the points from point A to point B. Okay. So what you can see over here is when the quantity of labor increases, yes, the country is able to produce more real GDP, more outputs, okay, from point A to point B over here. That's an increase. But you see one thing over here, there is a diminishing returns because the increment is not as high as before. Because you can see this graph over here, at first it increased very fast. You can see here, it increased very fast, but later on the increment is very slow. You can see here, this increment is at a slower rate, right? So here you can see the increment is at a slower rate. So therefore, this is what we call as law of diminishing returns. That means that when you increase workers, right? Okay, they will be able to produce more. But when you keep adding more and more workers, right? What happens is there will definitely be some sort of inefficiency. Like last time in micro, you learned about law of diminishing returns. When you keep adding the workers to the factory, right? The factory is having not enough spare capacity, so the workers will get into each other's way when they work. So that's the inefficiency that results in. Same thing over here. You can always increase the quantity of labor, but there will be a problem. There will be inefficiency. So therefore, although the real GDP is still increasing, okay, but the thing is increasing at a slower rate. Okay, so you can see here that is a law of diminishing returns. So therefore, if you use this method to increase your economic growth, the drawback is that there will be a lot of diminishing returns. So that means that there will be slowdown. Okay, the increase of real GDP, okay, will slow down, increasing at a slower rate.
So,
Look at the graph. Increase real GDP at a slower rate. That no problem. Okay, now the other method to achieve long-term economic growth is increase in factor quantity of productivity. Okay, that's the another method. So same thing, when I say factor means I'm referring to the resources. But here the difference is I look into quantity, I call as productivity coefficient. Now, example, okay, as long as the examples relate to these three terms that we divide, first one, increase in physical capital. What is physical capital? Physical capital means like equipment, machineries, and technology. Okay, increase in physical capital. Okay, increase in physical capital. Okay, or increase in human capital. Like people are educated, they go for training and education, they graduate from university, or increase in technological advancement. As long as the situations linked to these three things, either it result in more physical capital, or more human capital, or more technological advancement, right? It will result in this impact. Same thing, we can show it in production function. So let's have a look into the production function right here. Okay. So how the graph looks like? Same thing, the production function looks into the relationship of the two variables. One is real GDP on my y-axis, and the quantity of resources, as labor, for example, okay, on the x-axis. And this is your production function. So let's say, assuming at first is at this point A, at this real GDP with this amount of resources, what happens is when their productivity is improved, let's say they become more skilled, more productive, what happens is they are able to produce more. So you think about like this, just now, right, I hire one worker, I get one output. I hire two workers, I get two outputs. That's just now. But this time, I hire the same one worker, but I should get two outputs. So one worker should produce two outputs now. So become more productive, double up. So therefore, this will result in the upward shift of the PF curve. Okay, so you can see from point A, go up, point B. You are able to produce more with the same amount of the resources. So this is what the economy wants to achieve. So therefore, you can see that there is an upward shift of the production function. Okay, so what is the difference between these two scenarios? One is only result in movement of points. The other one result in shift of the graph. That's the things that you need to know. Okay, now let's have a look into tutorial question. Okay, question A. The government implements fresh scholarship aimed at fostering technical education. So you see, they implement fresh scholarship to encourage people to go and study. So when they do a study, it's part of education, part of training. So this is under increase in human capital, right? So therefore, the answers will be upward shift of the production function. So this is the answer. Upward shift of the production function for your question A. Okay. Okay, next one. There's a war in the country. So a war in the country destroy all your resources. Okay, so what happened is for this one. So for this one, how the graph will looks like. Okay, so same thing. Look into your y-axis and x-axis. Origin, real GDP, and same thing here is your quantity of your resources, or like your labor, for example. So at first, this is your production function. Let's say at first, this is your point A, at this output, at this quantity of resources. Okay, so there is a war in the country. Okay, war in the country destroy the resources. Okay, so war, what happened is it will destruct the resources. Okay, it will reduce the quantity and the quality of all your factors. Okay, you reduce quantity and quality of your resources. So that means what? That means later on your graph will have the shift and also the movement. Okay, so therefore your production function will shift downwards because this is war. Okay, so from point A to point B here. Okay. So you can see that it's a downward shift. Okay, a downward shift of production function. Okay, and also it will reduce your quantity of resources. So let's say from point B to point C over here. Okay, you produce even lesser. Okay, and you have less quantity of resources. So at the end, you can see you have less relativity and less quantity of your resources from point A to point B to point C. So for this one, what we need to observe is just the downward shift of the production function, okay, and also the movement of points. So two impacts here. But for the tutorial question, they actually didn't expect you to draw the graph, so I'm just showing you one. But you learn it in your slides as well. Just that not provide the graph answers in the tutorial sense. À, kênh 要一起的啊。Yes.哦啊，那个 exam 是在 midterm 是在6点啊。这样应该要你的话叫老师提早让你走那个时间，因为他没有影响到嘛。如果你的课时间是刚好 crash 到，我才能是一个 reason。So maybe you need to who is the teacher? You know about him? What UCM 啊？这是 UCM。
NPU，他讲他是会给我们做 attendance。
哦，then
你跟他讲
你跟他讲一声。那是 online 吗？
Yeah，有时候 online，有时候 physical。
哦，OK，可以。 Hey, hold on. Okay, so for this one, mini homework, I leave it to you to try it out. This one, must try. So every after one tutorial, I will provide some, simple work that for you to try to attempt, so that when you revise, you are able to try it out and see if you are able to do it. Remember just now I told you we have one calculation question, the easy one, nominal GDP, real GDP, GDP deflator. So something like this. You try it out. I provided the answers over here for you already. So this is for your self-independent learning. Okay? And okay, so this one I leave it to you. So these are the contents for your tutorial 1. So we are done with tutorial 1 already. Okay, so next week we are going to look into tutorial 2. Again, we are still on GDP. So we will look a bit more details in terms of the GDP contents. One last thing, as an introduction for the next week class. Okay, one last thing. So let's have a look into this one. Then we can call it a day. Okay. So let's have a look into this one over here. So remember when we one last thing. When we were to look into economic growth, okay, so when we were to look into economic growth, so we look into the increase in the output, okay, increase in the total outputs as measured by real GDP. Okay, that's what we had learned so far. So let's have a look into this simple scenario, which is cannot do annotation. Hold on. Okay, give me a while. We cannot do annotations when I share screen. It's okay. So therefore, let's have a look into this scenario. So first of all, you can see that there is a baker. Okay, so he produced bread, right? Okay, so what happened is when he produced this bread, he would like to sell to this lady. Okay, so therefore, first of all, he produced his outputs, he sold to this lady, and this lady will give him the money. Okay, she spent the money to buy the bread. Okay, now, so what happened is this guy over here, he has money already because he sold off his bread here. Okay, so therefore, since he has money, for example, he wants to buy meat from this person. Okay, so what happened is this person produced meat. So meat is the output. So he sold the output to this baker, and he has the money already just now, remember, because he sold off the bread. So he will pay. Okay, so that's the explanation. He spent the money on this person for the meat, and he got the meat. Okay, and now this person got the money already. So what happened is, let's say he want to buy the candle from this lady. Therefore, he will spend the money to buy the candles, and she will provide the candle as outputs. So do you realize one thing over here is that whatever outputs that's being produced, right, they will be purchased by the other person. Okay, and then after that, okay, when the person earns the money, it becomes the income as well. So one thing over here is that we can see, okay, we can see that the output is always equals to the expenditure. So you can see on the top, whatever that's being produced, right? Okay, will be the people will spend money to buy, and it will become the income of the person. So the output will always equals to the expenditure, and it will always equals to the income. So therefore, we can say that the national output, okay, whatever that's being produced in the economy, all right, will be purchased by people. Okay, so therefore, it equals to the national expenditure, and whatever that's being received by the sellers, it will be the income. So it equals to the national income as well. So therefore, one conclusion that we can see over here, okay, from all these output and expenditure that you can see from these three persons, okay, output is always equals to the expenditure and income. So these three things that you can see on the top. So that means in the next week lesson, when we were to calculate the GDP of the country, right, we can first start with any of these three methods. We can use either output approach, expenditure approach, or the income approach. So there will be three approaches for you to calculate the GDP that you are going to learn in the next week lesson. So I just show you that how come we have these three approaches. You can understand from this simple diagram. Okay, whatever I produce, I will cite to you. When you give me money, it will become my income. So the output will equals to your expenditure and through my income. So it's the same, theoretically speaking. Okay, so there will be three approaches that you are going to use to calculate GDP in next week lesson. So this is just an introduction for you. Okay.